My name is Claire Wagner, and I'm the president of Kunzang Palyu Choling, this beautiful Buddhist temple that you're at. And welcome, thank you all very much for coming. I wanted to give you just a brief idea of what's going to happen tonight. We want to tell you a little bit about Kunzang Palyu Choling KPC, where it's been and where we are and what our plans are for the future. Gompo Yeshe Williams is going to be, he's been a monk practicing here for 11 years, and he's going to be talking about the temple. Reverend Kasey Kaseman, who is the Interfaith Community Liaison here in Montgomery County, is going to say a little bit about KPC and how it functions within the community. And then David Bagnoli from Bagnoli Architects will be really talking about the plans that we have for the building for the future. So with that,
okay.
Gompo David Williams.
Good evening. I'm glad you're here. KPC has been operating for 31 years in this site here, for 30 years here, 31 years total. We are a center for Buddhist study and practice in the tradition that comes from Tibet, comes down through the lineages of Tibet. So it's one of the three primary ways of practicing Buddhism. This center and everything that you see around, and as we kind of move around to see some of the features, it's all the kind of the combination of efforts of our teacher, Jetsun Lakan Lama, who was recognized in this kind of remarkably, she's a Western person, grew up here, never studied in the monasteries, but she was recognized by this Palyu lineage in the Tibetan tradition as a teacher and as actually a holder of all those teachings that come down through that lineage. So the person who recognized her, Holiness Pena Rinpoche, who was the head of the lineage at the time, and she essentially created this space. You have around you all of the things symbolically that can remind you and actually stimulate that seed of enlightenment that the Buddha said is actually the essential nature of every living being. So that's what's happening on an external level here. The colors, the images, the text, even the sounds that we have here is all very carefully placed to bring out that essential nature that we all have, which is the goal of Buddhist practice, is to accomplish that nature. There's some unique features about KPC that we think also are worthy of just highlighting. We have a prayer room here that's been open to, KPC has been open to the public 24 hours a day through its entire existence. We have never closed our doors, daytime or night. That is the result of our teacher's desire before all of this got initiated to have a place where anybody could come, anytime, day or night, and be quiet, pray, meditate, grow spiritually. So it's a bit of a challenge actually to keep a facility open 24 hours a day, but we have kind of, as a group of people, have also committed to doing that. And even through some rather difficult times in the last few years, which we'll hear about, that's going to result in some very positive outcomes of new facilities for people, we've been able to stay open. So we have a prayer room that's open for anybody that would like to come. We offer our own teachings and practices here in the Palyu lineage as well. Those are all public. People can come to those practices, teachings. We have events, a couple large events a year, usually maybe 100, 200 people will come. Each week we have a small practice each night, 5, 6 people may come. On the weekends, a practice each day that maybe 10 to 20 people will come, depending on the day and kind of what's happening in the world around us. And then we offer both through video as well, or online, as well as live video recorded teachings of our teacher and other people in our lineage, so that for that educational part. We work with adults, we work with children. So we have the basis for spiritual development here that's open to anybody in the community, Buddhist or not. In addition, we have a very beautiful location here in Montgomery County, which we've tried to preserve the kind of rural and pristine nature of it, including across the street 65 acres of trails, and with a few meditation gardens, a couple religious monuments called stupas that have been built. But for the most part, we've maintained this wooded area that is natural to this environment. So that's open daylight hours. We do encourage people not to be over there at night because there's no lighting and electricity, so it's a safety concern. But we have recreation, then places for people to be inside. We have places for people to be outside. Essentially, making good on that initial wish that our teacher had to create a place. That place is offered here at KPC.
Good to see you all, and it's wonderful to be here within an interfaith kind of spirit. We have several faith traditions represented, and so in that spirit I'm going to begin with a quote from Pope John during another time of major transition in our world. You'll remember, the Vatican Council, he said that the peace of the world must be cast within the individual heart. And from there it must reach out to the ends of the universe. That's what's happening here. This is a place of prayer, of silence, and of peace. Every time I visit and I'm greeted by monks and nuns, I'm so aware of your presence and of the peace of which the rest of us can only be envious. The fact that you've had a prayer going here on a 24/7 basis now for, what, 20-some?
31 years.
31 years. And then in response today of violence internationally, locally, most recently with police, there are special services held here for the victims, for their families, for the neighborhood, the community at large. The ecological haven, as I refer to it here, that you have kind of in being part of the Ag Reserve, those trails with the stupas and centers for meditation, what a gift, and for that to be available to everyone in the county. These are precious gifts. In addition to all of that, Gampo, you were one of the originators of a religious leaders response team. You helped us form the purpose of that organization and have been on call 24/7 ever since. That's going on now 3 years, responding to any act of hate or violence. Claire, the president of KPC, serves on our executive committee and co-chairs with Rabbi David Schneer, who's here, the Neighbors in Need Working Group, and again serves on the executive committee overseeing all of the work that's done within Montgomery County. I remember the first time I was here, I was taken into your kitchen area, and there in the corner was a food pantry. I've forgotten what you called it, but at that time you were unaware of manna and all the rest of the work that was going on, feeding the hungry of Montgomery County. But you just knew, born out of your own prayer and life, faith of knowing how important it was to be feeding the hungry, to be caring for the needs of all people, had that here. So if people came and were needing food, that was being given to them. And since then, I know that you've connected with manna. For Thanksgiving, you used to have be able to open your doors and have whoever didn't have another place to go for Thanksgiving, this was their home. Now that that's no longer permitted by the county, you have reached out and are doing this now at shelters in Montgomery County. So I'm among those that are hoping and praying that the day will come when you'll be able to be inviting people in here as well as serving people out there. I don't know how many of you noticed coming in, there are blue floodlights and another one on the corner of this building, which is a reminder now to the police that this is a place where they could come for prayer. This is a place that's in solidarity with them and with their families as they are out protecting the security and safety of other people, are themselves now unfortunately being threatened. So it's wonderful to be working with you. Nothing is more important for our world, and certainly for Montgomery County today, as far as I'm concerned, than places like this that understand the importance of being at prayer, using that as a basis, being spiritually grounded, connected with the heart, with the creator and sustainer of all life, and then in a position of welcoming other people into that and reminding all of us that we are essentially brothers and sisters of one human family. And what we need more than anything else, again, is that love, that heart that can overcome all the divisions, all of the hatred, even the violence of our time. So thank you for being here, and I'm here, I'm sure, with everybody else wanting to empower your mission and ministry on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm David Bagnoli. I'm an architect here in a local community. I was brought into KPC in 2012, I think is when I got my first call from Dawa. The space that you're sitting in now is how we saw it when we first came, although there was some different uses that the congregation had been utilizing in different components of the building. And Dawa called and said, hey, we think we need to do a code analysis of our building because our congregation has grown so large that Montgomery County is asking that we upgrade the facility to separate our assembly uses, where people congregate, from our residences. So Gompo talked a little bit about what's happening spiritually around you, what's also happening physically around you, where there are, in this building, 10 beds of monks and nuns housing. That's also happening with the space that's across the hall we're going to see, which had been the traditional teaching space since the time they had bought the property. The house, we found out when we first came in, was built in 1973 and had been occupied by a single owner for about 12 years before KPC bought it and moved in. And so the congregation grew within the confines of the building, and the assembly space, which had been just a place for them to meet and congregate as a group trying to pray together and learn together, into a more specific kind of teaching space, which you'll see here in just a few minutes, and we're going to take you to see all of those. But in this initial walkthrough with Dawa and Claire and others, we recognized that there was some code issues that we needed to grapple with. And so we immediately set up a meeting to go down and talk to Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services to come clean and say, here's what we've got. We think we need to improve the building, and how will you help us do that? And it was at that fortunate meeting that we met Reverend Kaseman. And it was through that meeting that we had to immediately shut down the assembly use and teaching that happens within this portion of the building. And with the efforts of Hadi Mansouri and some other folks who helped us incredibly so down at DPS, we were able to isolate, from a fire standpoint, the room that you're going to see back here, that's the prayer room. And so for the last 3 years, the congregation has been operating at a loss of this all-important assembly space, teaching space, and anytime they've had to do a teaching, they've had to either do it in the space we're sitting in or outside in a tent. But the prayer room, which is a holy space, they try not to do it in there, and you're going to see that. We'll all take off our shoes and walk through it and all that. And so when we got through the issues with the prayer room, we did a full analysis, concurrent to that really, of what are the issues with this existing structure. If you just kind of look out the window there, what you'll see is a very thin frame of a building. This building was built in the early 70s. It's 2x4s with very little to no insulation. If there is insulation, it's all at the bottom of that wall. It's an energy hog, and the community would love to have a much more environmentally sensitive building that's reflective of their ideals. And so if it's not raining and we take a walk around, you'll see how beautiful the site is, but you'll notice some things around the site that are how they're living off of the land, for lack of a better word. Description, there's a well out here that you'll see where they're getting fresh water out of the ground, and there's a sanitary set of wetlands, which are really only 2 within the state of Maryland, that are there treating with their sanitary septic because the ground around us doesn't percolate. The sanitation doesn't take care of itself. And so there's a whole list of complicated issues we're dealing with. The building's not sprinklered for an assembly or residential space. We have to deal with that separation, and how do you deal with it in a fire? And so we probably are going to have a suppression tank to deal with how we might put out a fire should that happen. We're going to get into all of those issues as we start to examine what we need to do here, but one of the conclusions, the primary conclusion we came to, is that the building has really outlived its useful life. So it's over 40 years old. It's very poorly insulated. It's an energy sink, and it's right now not serving the full purposes of the community. And so the challenges that we're faced with here are trying to keep the monks and nuns living where they are, not kick them off of the property, but replace those residential quarters somewhere within the confines of the site, and replace those functions that Gampo alluded to in terms of the teachings that happen and in terms of those group meetings that happen on the weekends. We need to replace those somehow on the site, and they've made a significant investment in the prayer room. We want to try to keep that because we've already isolated that from a use standpoint, so that any fire that happens there doesn't affect the house, and any fire here doesn't affect the assembly space. As you noticed when you walked in, it's also not accessible to a handicapped person. It does not meet ADA as a place of public worship. So we need to fix that as well. And so we believe there's going to be a phased improvement to the property that's going to happen to allow the monks and nuns to stay. So we imagine that we may be building separate residential structures somehow to replace those, and replacing the assembly space somehow in some kind of phased way where we might replace this structure. We're not sure what that's going to look like. We certainly will invite you all back when we meet again in September with some early ideas about how we're going to do that. But one of the things that we know is that we're trying to keep everybody in place without displacing the residents. We need to be as environmentally sensitive as we can be, and we need to be respectful of Department of Permitting Services requirements and park and planning's requirements. And so on the park and planning side, to that end, about 2 years ago, we engaged a law firm to help us deal with the zoning issues that exist on the property. And it's pretty clear that replacing the uses that we have and dealing with the traffic counts that we have, we're not increasing those, that we're within the bounds of what the zoning allows here. And so we're looking to replace the functions you're going to see tonight. We're not looking to increase the capacity of this. You'll see there's a small parking lot up here. We'll keep the same number of cars. Gampo talked about these teachings. It sometimes brings from 100 to 200 to 300 people. Those happen once, maybe twice a year, and they get a special permit for those when those do happen. That's not what we're designing to. We're designing to the 30 to 40 people in the worship space, and I think that's important for you to note. So some things we're going to see tonight when we walk through, and I'm happy to answer questions, as I'm sure Kasey and Gampo or Claire would be willing to do. We can do that when we're walking around. We can do it here. We're going to take you through just so you can see some of the quarters and the condition of the house. The house is literally starting to fall down around them, and I only point that out because there's a recent leak that you're going to see over a very sacred sculpture called a mandala that's in the other room. So there's a bunch of stuff on the ground. The reason that's on the ground is because their pipes are starting to leak. So there's a real need to replace the facility here. We're going to go to the prayer room. Behind me is the dining facility where the monks and nuns eat in community. There's a little kitchen there, the pantry that Kasey mentioned. There's a small retail store here that we could peek into as well. And if it's not raining, one interesting thing about the site, Gampo talked about the spirituality of the site. There is a very large stupa. You've heard that word a couple of times tonight. You'll see a very large gold and white stupa back here. The community circumambulates around 3 times saying prayers. That's over in this corner. And then all 4 of the other corners are also smaller stupas that you'll see, and those are open. There's paths that more or less connect you, and so you should feel free to walk the grounds to see that. And as you go down over the hill where you see those wetlands, we talked about the ecological thing that's happening across with the park. There's also an aviary sanctuary that's down there that you can hear some birds squawking. That's the aviary sanctuary. And if you're aware of parrots and their lifespan, they can last for 75 to 100 years, and oftentimes their owners have nothing, they may outlive their owners. And so KPC adopts those birds as best they can to their capacity, and they keep them in this aviary down over the hill. So we'll invite you back in September, I think, maybe towards the end of September, when we feel like we've got enough stuff to show you. But we thought it would be important for people to have an appreciation of what we're grappling with here in terms of the lack of the facility, in terms of meeting the needs of the community. So when you walk through the teaching space on the other side of the stair, it's a little convoluted now because of all the stuff that's come off of Mandala, but that used to hold the 30 to 40 people where they would do their teachings.
So I have a lot of questions.
Sure.
Wetland.
Yes.
Have you specifically clearly identified the wetland boundary?
So the wetlands have been approved and operational since 1992. There are
Okay.
3 functioning cells out there, although they have an extra one approved within the bounds of those wetlands. The wetlands go through the Department of Environmental Protection for the state of Maryland, not through WSSC or through DPS or Park and Planning. Unfortunately, the ground around us doesn't perk, and so the capacity of those wetlands is 3,200 gallons a day, which is pretty darn high for a facility of this kind. So there's no intention to increase the capacity of what's permitted out there right now. Those wetlands get treated occasionally. By occasionally, I mean every couple of days. They have pipes and things that they clean out and treat, and they have to deal with the nitrogen that's in the soil and things like that. But yeah, those are active and remain permitted, and those permits are renewing.
And there's another question about the River Road,
Yes, sir.
190. Is the state own this road?
Yes, sir.
Have you talked to the state highway administration as far as deceleration lane and the sidewalks or anything that they wanted to?
We have had those conversations, I'd say, at a high level. As we start to look at the improvements, those are going to be things that will come up in the natural course of the permitting process. We did do a traffic statement with TMOS, if you know Sharian. And again, because we're not increasing the capacity of what we're offering here on the site, we don't expect that there will be any changes out there. We also think it's quite important that the site recognize and remain part of the agricultural reserve, and it's the way it presents itself. And I'm not sure what the state's intentions are for the highway out here, but I would imagine that the rural nature of the road probably will trump sidewalks and things. There's no real need for overflow parking and deceleration lanes and those things. We don't get that kind of traffic out here.
The final question is parking.
Yes, sir.
How many parking spaces do you have now?
29. That's what we'll keep.
Okay, so are you going to relocate some of the parking spaces?
Yeah, so one of the things that as architects, even though we're just getting started, we're always thinking about how do we make things better. And this stupa, which you may or may not have noticed, is really an important thing. And we'd love to get that more visually connected to the site. And so that parking lot's great if you want to park and look at the stupa, but we think there's a better way to integrate the stupa and get the parking maybe dispersed across the site. How we do that, that's what we're going to be working on. But I think that parking lot's going to be relocated.
The county probably DPS require handicap parking.
Handicap parking and fire truck access. We've
Fire-
already met
the
with
width
Maureen
of the
about,
road. But you are within, the depth of the building to the road, so they don't need a turnaround space for fire engines.
Yeah, depending on what happens if the building goes away. But,
They
yeah.
usually, any historical features on the property?
So, somebody brought that up a couple of years ago, and we did do a little bit just digging in to see. The building, as I say, was built in 1973. So there's nothing really particularly historic about the structure. We've been through a title search on the property to understand that there's no archaeology required. No, nothing that any of our investigations with the civil engineering, Morton Thomas's or civil engineers. Yeah. So
Okay, specimen trees, any large?
there are large specimen trees which you'll see, and we want to keep those. So
So you're not,
the intention, if we take, there's rules if you have to take down a specimen tree, but what you'll notice is out here, when you walk out the front, there's that big lawn with there may be 1 or 2 specimen trees somewhere around that lawn. we got to be careful about where we locate things.
And also, the wetland needs some kind of buffer. You can't too close.
Correct, that's right. And I mean, we have to deal with stormwater management, which when these wetlands were designed and improved, didn't grapple with the runoff from rainwater. These are sanitary wetlands. So we're going to have to grapple with storm runoff and rain gardens and all kinds of things. But, you know, Kasey talked a little bit about the pantry and the homeless. One of the things we've kicked around is, you know, if you look out here, there's these community gardens that are here, and could we actually have an opportunity for the Temple community or even the homeless community come and grow food somehow within the bounds and use that within the structure of the design for stormwater management. So, yeah. And as I say, we're working with A. Morton Thomas, which sounds like you're familiar with them. They're a very good group. Yeah, we've done a lot of homework. We're ready to get going. We're anxious.